Thank you and good evening. It's my great honor to be here tonight to introduce John Shores. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you there are little note cards in your program to ask questions. So as questions occur to you during his talk, please jot them down and somebody will come around and collect them from you at the end, and then we'll ask them to him in a little question and answer session at the end of his formal remarks. John Shores is one of a special breed of Iowans I've had the privilege of learning and writing about in my years in this state. Born and bred in the middle of the country, raised on its hometown values of community and neighborhood, they still burn with a curiosity about the rest of the world and a desire to connect with and understand it. It's a wanderlust that takes these particular explorers like John, not just to popular European capitals, but to remote and distant locales to live as one among their peoples. John had the sort of education, grooming, and other credentials that could probably, if he had chosen, earn him a cushy corner office in a swanky corporate environment. But after graduating from college, he chose instead to go backpacking in Asia on a shoestring budget. His drive to understand other peoples and his gift for storytelling instead helped catapult him into best-selling author status. Many of us have known a struggling writer who had to support the habit with a day job. But John is one of a rare breed of novelists who's actually earning a living off his fiction. And he's doing it in a way that flouts conventional wisdom about what people want to read. His canvases are the underground streets of post-war Vietnam, the pristine beaches of pre-tsunami Thailand, the forbidden passions of 17th century India. His characters are wounded souls seeking redemption or fighting captivity, sometimes within walls of their own making. They are children struggling to hang on to their sense of wonderment against an exploitative world. Their triumphs are usually a testament to the power of human relationships, of father and daughter, husband and wife, grandmother and grandchild, older brother and younger brother, stranger and stranger. A key to John's commercial success, besides the fact that he writes good books, is that they've been published in 25 languages and are immensely popular abroad, from France to the Netherlands to Indonesia. In fact, he says more copies have been published abroad than even in the United States. By setting his novels against the backdrop of historical events, such as wars and natural disasters, he provokes his readers into a deeper inquiry about those moments in history. And by bringing American characters into homes all over the world and Asian protagonists into American homes, John takes us places that might not have entered our radar and introduces us to people who, despite their foreignness, are much like ourselves. He thereby achieves what he says is his biggest goal, to show that we're all a lot more alike than different. It is significant that John joins us on this day, the day after September 11th, as Americans reflect on the lessons of these last 10 years and look ahead to forging interactions with the world's people beyond the prisms of terrorism and war. Maybe if we shared more stories, we'd explode fewer bombs and IEDs. Maybe if we saw the commonality of our human experiences, our failings, our yearnings, our basic humanity, we'd be less prone to distrust each other in the ways that give lead to discord. John is instrumental in making that happen. So please help me in giving a very, very warm welcome to our speaker tonight, John Shores. Thank
you. Thank you. She's a very tough act to follow, so hopefully I won't drop things too far. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the Des Moines Library Foundation everybody at Hoyt Sherman, and of course, all of you. I really appreciate your support, and I'm grateful that not only are you supporting me, but the Des Moines Library Foundation. I thought tonight I would talk a bit about my various novels, how they came to be, my writing process, of course, my new novel, Cross Currents, which I'm quite excited about, and then do a short video of the place that Cross Currents occurs, and then open things up to a Q&A session, if that works for people. So anyway, I like to start out every talk with a little story. It's not always this story, but breaking into the world of a published author is not easy. There are a lot of peaks and valleys and various points of humiliation along the way. And I've told the story once before in Des Moines, so a few of you have probably heard it, and I apologize to those of you for being repetitious, but it is a story that's very suitable for tonight, so bear with me for a moment, those of you who have heard it. When I first started out in this business, my first novel, Beneath the Marble Sky, how many people in here have read the first book? Wow, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I need to buy you drinks afterwards. Thank you. When the first book came out in 2004, I was working very hard at a public relations agency, quite busy, and I had to figure out, my first novel was published by a small publishing house with no marketing budget. And I remember talking to my publisher about it. He said, we're going to go out and try to hunt elephants with a slingshot, talking about competing with the big publishing houses. And so I was always out sort of trying to figure out ways or opportunities to promote that first book, Beneath the Marble Sky, which is a novel about the Taj Mahal. And one day I was sitting at work at my PR agency, messing around on my book stuff, probably when I should have been working for some client. And I saw that Houston had a festival called iFest. And what Houston does every year is it's like a $20 million event. It's a big deal. They turn a downtown park into Houston into a particular country. It might be Jamaica, it might be Mexico, it might be wherever. And in 2004, it happened to be India. And this is an event that draws 700,000, 800,000 people to it. It's a big deal. And I thought, wow, I bet I can go to this event and sell 1 million copies of my book. This is great. Here begins the humiliation. So I contacted somebody with the event. I believe her name was Mary. And she said, we've never had an author, John. This sounds great. It sounds like a really good fit. Let's do this. Would you mind doing a reading? And readings aren't my favorite thing to do, but I said, sure, I'll do a reading. So I arrived at Houston at night, and my hotel was near this park. And at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I walked out to the park, curious to see this venue. And it was amazing. I mean, these elaborate stands and reincarnations of temples and so forth in India. It was remarkable what they'd done to this park. It was really neat. And I finally found where I was stationed. And there was a little podium with a little table. And there were 40 folding chairs out in the periphery I was supposed to speak to as I'm doing this book signing. And I thought to myself, okay, this will work, no problem. And as I was kind of checking out the lay of the land, these 3 semi-trucks with big National Basketball Association written on the side kind of backed into this area near me. And I didn't really understand what was going on. And these guys started unloading the trucks and started assembling these massive basketball courts with catwalks and huge screens and all these graphics and this and that. And I said to them, are you here for the iFest? And they said, oh, yes, we are. And I said, what does the NBA have to do with India? Nobody could give me an answer. But so I thought, okay, I can. This will be interesting. So I was supposed to do my book reading at 10 a.m. the next morning. And I showed up about 9 o'clock. And I got to my little table, and I had all my books piled up and perfectly arranged. And I was feeling very high and mighty for all of 10 seconds. And there was a trail kind of going in front of my area directly to the NBA exhibit. And there were literally thousands and thousands of people walking right past me to the NBA thing. And they had the whole Houston Rockets team there. It was a big deal. And meanwhile, I am just the world's biggest idiot standing behind this table. And it got to be about 9:50, and there was not a single person in any of the chairs. And Mary came up to me and she said, "John, you excited to do your reading?" And I said, "No, I'm not." I said, I'm not doing the reading." And she said, and I had never spoken to anyone before. And she said, "No, John, this is important. You're our first author. I've told my boss about it. He's expecting a big reading. We've advertised it." I said, "Where did you advertise it?" And she pointed to this little 8x11 thing that they nailed to a nearby tree. I said, "Great." And she said, and I said, "There's nobody out there. Who am I going to read to?" She said, "I'll tell you what, I'll go out there. You can read to me." She had this big white hat on, and she went out there and sat in the middle of 39 empty chairs around her, and I said, "Give me a moment, please." I ran across the road to a big Budweiser truck, grabbed a big beer, and bam, to settle the nerves a little bit, came back to my podium and looked out, and she was alone in the sea of empty chairs as there are thousands of people walking past. And I got out my book, and Beneath the Marble Sky is full of complicated, complex names, and it's not a book that lends itself just perfectly to a reading. But I chose a passage, and I started reading, and as I was reading, I was kind of looking up, and the situation seemed so absurd that I started to get the giggles. And I was pinching myself behind the podium, trying to pull it together. I couldn't pull it together. So I was giggling and giggling and giggling and trying to read, and all these people were walking past, and they turned and started to look at me, like, who is this? Because the PA system was very loud. And they started to look at this lunatic up behind this podium reading this book, and people stopped and stared as if they would just witnessed a wreck on I-70 and wanted to, out of morbid curiosity. And again, I think people wanted to see this person just kind of fall apart on the stage, so they started to sit down, and all of the chairs were filling up, and soon there was an overflow crowd. And I was still giggling because I couldn't stop. And I made it through the whole passage. And at this point, there were a couple hundred people there. And I got a big round of applause and ended up selling hundreds and hundreds of books. So it's an interesting way to break into a business, but I think that was an important day for me. And so the point of that story is thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. I will, thank you. I will do my best not to start giggling up here. If I do, just bear with me. I thought I would talk a bit about how my writing career happened. As many of you know, I went to Roosevelt High School. Thereafter, I went to Colorado College. And Roosevelt, some writers in here, good. And after graduating from Colorado College, my best friend and I decided that we wanted to live abroad and experience some unique things. So we decided that we would go teach English in Japan. We didn't have jobs. We had no place to live, no money, couldn't speak Japanese, but it seemed like a great idea to hop on a plane and fly to Japan. So we did that, and we basically lived on the street, essentially, for a month. And we're splitting little things of white rice to eat every day, and it was not easy. But it worked out really well, and ended up living there for a couple of years and saved up enough money that we then backpacked around Asia for a year and had an amazing experience. And I had always wanted to be a novelist. I knew it was a difficult thing to break into, but I wanted to do it. And we were taking this trip, and we were in India visiting the Taj Mahal. And I saw the beauty and the majesty and the magic of the Taj Mahal, and was very entranced by it. And my little brother happened to be living there, studying abroad, and he said, "You should write your first novel about the Taj." And I thought, that's a really interesting idea. And I came back to the U.S. and found out that there had never been a novel written about the Taj Mahal before. So I thought, there's this incredible story behind it. No one has ever done it. It seems like a nice opportunity. So I spent the next 5 years working weekends, nights, vacations, writing this novel. And it came out in 2004, and it luckily has done very well. And I've spoken to 3,000 book clubs and all sorts of crazy things to promote it. And that book has done well here and well abroad. And what it did is it kind of gave me a boilerplate, a template for what I wanted to do, which was to travel overseas to find a very compelling locale, compelling culture, setting, story, and then figure out how to write a novel around that. And that's essentially what I've done from day one. It's to go to Asia, go to some of these countries that are off the beaten path, get to know them well, understand the people, the culture, and then write about them, because many writers have done things set in Europe and, of course, China and Japan, but they're beautiful, exotic places that have never been written about. And so I just decided this is what I wanted to do. So my novels have all done that. And in 1992, after finishing teaching English in Japan, my best friend and I went on a tour of Thailand. And we had heard about this little island called Koh Phi Phi, which was almost this sort of, had this mystical status among backpackers. And we were very excited to see it. And we got there, and I arrived with a terrible case of food poisoning. I was very sick. We got there, and I sat on this beach, and I felt like I just stumbled into a slice of paradise. This island is shaped like a butterfly with these 1,000-foot cliffs on either side, with this little sandy area in the middle with bungalows and a few little restaurants and so forth. And turquoise water, no roads, no cars, nothing, just paradise. And not only was it physically beautiful, but the people were just exquisite. And you had this merging of cultures there between European cultures and Scandinavian and Western and Thais, and it was just a neat place, and it was very inspiring. And I went back in 1994 and then 1999, kept going back to this little island, Koh Phi Phi, thinking this is a place I could retire. And each time I went back, there were a few more hotels, a few more people, a few more boats, and this and that, and it was a little disconcerting to see that. But this place still maintained this sort of beauty, this magic. And came back to the States and settled down in Colorado. And then I remember December 26, 2004, we were at home, just had celebrated the holidays with family, and the Indian Ocean tsunami struck. And I was watching these images on CNN of this calamity. And suddenly I recognized this island, Koh Phi Phi, and I couldn't believe it, because the little town was just gone. And I was very distraught about that. I wanted to go back and help, but we had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I obviously couldn't do that. But I started reading more about it, and this where the village is about, it's 6 feet above sea level at the highest part. The wave that came in was 18 feet high and came in about 60 miles an hour, and the people really didn't have much of a chance. The remarkable thing is that at the time there were 10,000 people on the island, and of the 10,000 people, 3,000 people died, which is obviously very, very awful. But what was amazing is that it wasn't worse. And what I learned thereafter, following it on the news and talking to people, was basically what happened during this event is just strangers saved strangers. And when there were incredible stories of heroics, and what happened could have been much, much worse. So I started thinking about this, and then thereafter, what was neat was many of the Americans and Europeans and whomever, Scandinavians, stayed, and the Thais, many of the Thais stayed, and they worked to rebuild this little island. People actually carried 7,000 tons of debris out of the bay by hand. So it's a pretty remarkable sort of thing, and it really, I started thinking about the strength of the human spirit and that resiliency, and how people will come together when faced with circumstances like that. And it was a really unique sort of feeling. And I went back in 2007 to sort of think about if this was a novel I wanted to do. And I started talking to cooks and to mothers and to masseuses and to fishermen. I talked to this one fisherman who said the wave was right after him, and he couldn't find his children, but he grabbed a little blonde kid in each arm and made it to the hills right before the wave came in, and then he never found his kids. but really remarkable stories. And these people stayed there, and they endured, and very triumphant stories. And I just thought at that time, this is a novel I want to do. And I went back to the U.S., and I talked to my editor at Penguin, who's very smart, and I like her. But she said, I don't want you to do this book, John. And I said, why? And she said, well, because people don't want to read about things like that. And we went back and forth, and finally I said, okay, I'll do something else. So I did something else, but I was always sort of thinking about this novel. I wanted to write this story about the strength within us all. And I went back to her a year later, and I said, I want to do this book. And she said, I don't want you to do this book. Because she said, people don't want to read about events like that. And I said, well, the Titanic was the biggest selling movie of all time. Everyone knew the ship was going to sink. And she said, well, that's true. And I said, well, let's get some guts here. Let's go for it. And she said, all right. So I sat down, and I went back in 2010 and took my wife and our little kids to Thailand, and we had this amazing experience. The kids were speaking Thai and eating Thai food and playing with the Thai kids on the beach. It was really remarkable, and I got very excited to write this novel. And it's a story that it's not about, I mean, it takes place over an 11-day period, and the tsunami makes an appearance at the very end. At the core, it's a story of human relationships. It's a story of two families, an American family, two brothers, one of whom was in trouble with the law, and then a Thai family, a three-generational Thai family that's running this resort and is trying to make ends meet. And at some point in the book, the two families sort of intermingle and rely on each other. And then the wave comes in, of course, at the end. But it's really this story of perseverance, the strength within us all. And it just came out a week ago. I'm really excited about it. National Geographic just chose it as the book of the month for September, which is a nice coup. And yeah, so I'm that one. Thank you. Thank you. I won't start giggling. Look at all of you. So the book's doing really well. I made my first, in the book business, the big new thing are these book trailers. And authors will pay some video company $5,000, $10,000 to go make some book trailer for them. I did one myself on YouTube, and I thought I would show it to you tonight just to give you a feel for this island. This isn't an advertisement for my novel. I just want you to see some images of this place and these people, and maybe we can do that at this point. Thank you. It's 4 minutes long. Bear with me. has a special place, a place that's very near and dear to me, and that's one of the reasons that I wrote this novel. And I should add that with all my books, I try to have some good come out of them. So I always partner with a nonprofit. And with this particular book, I'll donate a % of the proceeds to the International Red Cross. And this has worked really well in the past. For instance, my third novel, Dragon House, which is set in modern-day Vietnam, and it's about 2 Americans who go overseas to Vietnam, basically to open an orphanage for street kids. Through the proceeds of that novel, I've been able to donate money so that we bought 1,000 homeless kids in Vietnam complete sets of school books. So that outcome has been, oh, thanks. So it's nice to have some good come out of the books, and hopefully some good will come out of this one to help the International Red Cross. So I'm glad all of you came. I appreciate it. If you want to keep in touch, please drop me a line on Twitter or Facebook, and I'm grateful for your support, truly. Thank you for the Des Moines Library Foundation for having me, for Hoyt Sherman, and for all of you to come out to support myself, the Library Foundation. And at this point, I'd be delighted to answer some questions, and I think I'm supposed to sit down over here in that lovely-looking chair. And so feel free to, or perhaps you've already distributed your questions. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody.
That was a lovely job and a beautiful video. And I wanted to ask you, it begs the obvious question, is there a movie coming out of any one of your books? Because they lend themselves perfectly.
Well, thank you. The movie stuff is very interesting. We've definitely had a lot of interest from Hollywood in the various books. And the first one, I think, probably is going to get turned into a miniseries for HBO or Showtime. It's a slow process, but it's definitely evolving. But I will say that the movie people are funny. I talk to them every month or so, and hopefully there are not a lot of movie people in the audience. But it's a different sort of a crowd. I always get a call, and it'll be one of the movie people, and it'll be the movie person's assistant, and so maybe it's Beth calling for Jeff, and Beth will say, "John, I've got Jeff on the phone. You want to do a call?" And I'll say, "Sure." So I'll start talking to Jeff, and we'll be on cell phones, and we'll lose the connection, and 3 seconds later, I'll get a call back from Beth. "Beth, John, it's Beth again. You want to continue your conversation with Jeff?" "Sure." I mean, God forbid Jeff would just call me back himself. So it's an interesting group, but very nice people, and I think some things are going to work out. Long answer to your short question.
Wonderful. Well, I would love to see this last one, Cross Currents, be a movie too. I love that book.
Thank you.
And that leads to my next question. There is, I find in your novels, and particularly in this one, a kind of a childlike innocence that you bring to your prose, and it's. I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit. I mean, it's partly that there will be these very hardened characters who have seen horrible things, been in war, bad alcoholics, but still there's this sense of playfulness in them or wonderment. And the way that you write is, there is a kind of innocence about it, even though you're dealing with sometimes very tough subjects. For example, you don't have hardcore sex scenes. You don't have hardcore violence scenes. Tell me about that. Is that a part of the Iowa values that shaped you, or did you go to Asian countries and develop that sort of sense of modesty and innocence as reflected in the people you encountered?
That's a great question. I would say that sort of both. Obviously, my Iowa values play a big role in who I am. I would also say that Asian sort of culture is very playful. In particular, like the Thai people they all act like they're a bunch of little kids, and I love that, and that's one of the reasons that I love this country, and just that sort of innocence and playing jokes on each other and things like that. That's a lot of fun, and so that does sort of seep into my novels.
One issue that I've grappled with when I've done reporting from foreign countries, and of course that's a very different thing from novel writing, is wanting to come across as authentic to people in those countries. What sorts of feedback have you gotten from people in those countries that you've written about as far as the degree of realism with which they see you portraying their characters? Has there been any criticism ever that this is not authentic or this is not really us?
I would say that 99% has been very positive. I mean, I, of course, obsess over my Amazon.com reviews, and every once in a while there'll be somebody who thinks I didn't get some fact right and will give me 1 star. Shame on them. But
shame on them.
The vast majority of the feedback has been very positive, and it continues. It's very interesting. In fact, just this weekend, I was Googling stuff, and I came across a recent review in the leading Pakistani newspaper, and I saw the headline. I thought, oh boy, what could this be? And they love the first book, Beneath the Marble Sky, and my books tend to do very well overseas, and I get emails every day from people all over the world who are delighted to hear about a new area. And so the feedback has been very positive.
And it has also, your novels have also, as I understand, led a lot of people to travel to these countries that you've written about. In fact, one of the questions here, which has to do with Cross Currents, I think you sort of answered part of this. How did you find out about the island where Cross Currents was based? But maybe you could go into that a little bit more. But then the question, how do we get there? So obviously you've tripped some people's imagination.
Yes, I know, and I feel the island is there's this, in the early 90s there was this backpacker circuit in Southeast Asia that I was lucky enough to be a part of, and this was shoestring. I mean, I was staying in places that were $3 a night, and it wasn't necessarily for the faint of heart. But we discovered these wonderful places that have since become way more popular. And every time now I open Condé Nast Travel or Travel and Leisure or something, there's a big article about these places that we discovered 20 years ago. But one of these little islands is Koh Phi Phi, and it's easy to get to. You can fly into Bangkok, and then you take another little flight in a ferry, and you get over there. But the islands they're definitely becoming more developed. They're not quite the way they used to be, but they're still amazingly beautiful, and as you saw from those photos, still fairly undeveloped and special places, in part both because of the natural sort of landscape as well as the Thai people who remain very innocent and childlike and have this great rapport with tourists, which is so wonderful because so many places you go, the locals don't like the tourists and vice versa. And it's the opposite in this place. People get along very well, and it's a powerful feeling.
All right, here's an interesting question. In each of your books, you always have a delicious evil character. Is this from your imagination, or have you met such completely evil characters?
Well, this book, there's no evil character, but both my imagination and in real life, probably. Maybe a former boss has been reincarnated, but
I'm not naming any names.
I can't name any names, but no, I mean certainly traveling in Asia at the time, 20 years ago, on a shoestring budget. I mean, my friends and I definitely got ourselves into some fairly hairy situations where clearly people would have been happy to do bad things to us, and that was part of the deal. That's changed now when I go back. Obviously, it's a different sort of deal now. But in terms of my characters in the various books, it's part based upon my experiences, and it's part my imagination.
One of the lovely relationships in Cross Currents is the relationship between brother and brother. The older brother who's always looking out for the younger brother, who's always done everything by the book and right, and the younger brother who keeps screwing up, for lack of a better word, and the dynamic between them. Is there anything in your life? You're one of 4 brothers.
Yeah.
Anything in your life that gave you first-hand experience in that kind of relationship?
Well, I would probably be the screw-up. You know, not really. I mean, what I wanted to do was I wanted to write about a close relationship, and I could have chosen a couple of best friends, but I think they're 2 of the central characters in Cross Currents are these brothers, and one is straight as an arrow, and the other has gotten into trouble. And I just thought there were dynamics within that relationship between brothers, competition and things like that would make it a little more unique to write about, as opposed to a couple of best friends.
why was brother of Beneath the Marble Sky so hungry for power that he went against his father, other brother, and siblings? How much of this novel was historical fiction?
Well, since most of you have read Beneath the Marble Sky, I would say that probably 80% of that novel is historically accurate. The major events in the book really happened, the relationship between the emperor and his wife, the way that the Taj Mahal was built. My narrator, Jahanara, did in fact help the architect. She supported the good brother against the bad brother. She was imprisoned with her father in the Red Fort. So all those things really did happen. And the evil son went against his father just because he wanted power. He wanted to control the country.
Your next work in progress is set in Angkor Wat, and the question asks, will the book about Angkor Wat take place at current times or during its construction?
The book set in Angkor Wat is going to be another epic historical tale, kind of like my first book, Beneath the Marble Sky. I was in Angkor Wat in January, and it was fantastic. And the novel takes place in the 11th century. At the time, there were 1 million Khmers living in Angkor Wat, and the Vietnamese came in, sacked the city, and the prince and his wife escaped into the jungle. And for 4 years, they raised an army, and they came back and retook the city. And it's a pretty remarkable story in real life, and that's a story that I'll be bringing to life in the next book if I ever get it finished, because it's 500 pages.
One of the keys to your success, as we've discussed in the past, has been your availability, your accessibility to speak to book clubs from remote. Talk a little bit about how that happened and how you promoted that concept, because you were the first person to do it and you actually got national TV play and recognition for that. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I wanted to do something when Beneath the Marble Sky started to do really well as a hardcover. I wanted to thank all of the readers who were out there buying it and telling their friends about it and supporting me. B, I wanted to sell more books. So I put a letter in the back of the paperback inviting book clubs to invite me to their evenings, and I included my email address, and that had never been done before. And so it did get a lot of national media attention. And so over the last 7 years, I've actually spoken to about 3,000 book clubs via speakerphone and Skype. And now that my books are doing so well overseas, I'm talking to book clubs in Africa and Asia and Europe and the Caribbean. And it's a really interesting experience. And it's fascinating going from book club to book club. Some are very studious and have been Googling things for hours. Some have been drinking margaritas for hours. So,
which one is more fun to speak to?
I prefer the margarita groups. But they're always interesting, and I enjoy them.
And speaking of which, how do you feel about the marketing aspect of a book? I mean, unfortunately, so much of the life of a writer goes beyond just writing. You have to go out and sell and do a whole sales pitch, and you have to talk to people like us. How do you, of course, you love this particular audience and tonight, but in general, does it get tiresome? Does it get tedious? Do you wish that you could just retreat into the safety of your own private space sometimes?
Well, maybe, but that's not the real world. I mean, it was interesting. My first book is done very well in France, and I was over at a big festival in France, and Amy Tan and I have the same publisher, and we were sitting together, and it was a rainy, miserable, cold day, and she was out there in the drizzle signing books for 5 hours. Both of us were freezing, and I kind of realized at that moment, here's Amy Tan, this international bestseller, and she's out here trying to connect with readers in the cold, and most successful authors, I don't care how successful they are, that's the way that it is, and that's the way that it's important. And I think in this day and age, most successful authors realize that they need to connect with their readers. I mean, if you guys are going to go out and buy my books, for instance, it's important for me to make the effort to communicate back, and whether that's responding to an email or a Facebook message or doing an event, it's a really important part of the equation.
What message do you have for potential fledgling authors in the audience as far as how to make their work marketable and how to market themselves?
Well, I get asked a lot about from kind of newbie writers who are trying to get published, and I get all these emails from people saying, I just finished my manuscript, I went over it once, I'm ready to send it out. And what I write back to them is that I edited my first novel 56 times from start to finish. It's so incredibly difficult to break into this industry that if you're premature, if you rush things, it's not going to work out very well. If you send off a manuscript to an agent and the agent sees a typo on page 3, you're done. So I would say take the time to hone your craft and get it as good as you possibly can before you ever go down the road of trying to get published.
Have you ever gotten brutal feedback from an editor, and how do you handle that?
I haven't gotten brutal feedback from an editor, but I will tell a funny story that happened to me the other day. So I always, now that I'm doing videos on YouTube, I'm always curious, and I had posted this video of Beneath the Marble Sky, answering questions, because occasionally I can't talk to a book club. Maybe I'm traveling or something, or it just won't work out. So I put together a 10-minute video of me answering all these questions about the book. And I'm always curious how many people have seen it, so I go back and look at the views. So I did the search for Beneath the Marble Sky, and the second video popped up, and it was from this woman, Luann something. And it had like 80 views, so I was curious, and I clicked on it, and basically this lunatic had posted this rant against me and my book, and it had basically gotten up there and said all this nasty stuff and was lying right and left, and so my feathers got a little ruffled, and I made the mistake of emailing her, and I said, you're totally entitled to your own opinion. I respect your opinion. If you don't like the book, that's fine, but please don't, you're not being truthful in your video. And I was very mellow about it, and then the next day I got on YouTube again. She had posted a second video saying, you know you're getting into the author's skin when he emails you directly and this and that. And so then I actually contacted YouTube and said, this is not right what she's doing, and YouTube removed the videos. But anyway, I don't remember which your original question was.
No,
but,
no, it was something along those lines.
You do get some interesting
but taking
feedback.
criticism, I think.
Yeah.
What was she saying? And was she an old disgruntled girlfriend or somebody that you had distanced somewhere? Did you ever figure out who she was and what her agenda was?
No, she was just thought that she was saying that these things didn't really happen with the Taj Mahal, and she was just wrong. So that's what frustrated me.
Who are some of your literary idols and role models? And also, what do you do for inspiration when you're in a dry spell, when you're a stuck moment?
I mean, I love a big epic novel set overseas, like a James Clavell Shogun. I mean, that's my kind of book with many characters and subplots and textures. That's the sort of thing I try to write, and I enjoy reading. Sometimes when I'm neck deep in my own writing, I don't read as much, because what I find is every writer has his or her own voice, and I don't really like to get influenced by the voices of other writers. For instance, before I wrote Cross Currents, there's a famous novel out called The Beach. I'm sure some of you have read it, by Alex Garland. And it takes place on a little island in Thailand, and has to do with the backpacker scene. And I read that book prior to sitting down to writing this. And it's a great book, but his style is so different than mine that it totally threw me off. And it literally took 2 weeks out of my schedule just because I couldn't write at that point. And I typically don't really get writer's block. And when I do, I just force myself to work through it. And obviously, some days it flows better than others. But I give myself defined goals each day and try to stick to those. And most days it flows pretty well.
You actually started writing as a journalist. You worked here for a while for a business publication in town. Talk a little bit about the transition between journalism and fiction.
Yeah, I worked for the Des Moines Business Record, and I really enjoyed that experience. I had a great editor there, and I think what that taught me was working under deadline, being productive, treating words almost as if they're coins. You don't want to spend them too freely. And it was a very beneficial experience for me. And a lot of novelists are former journalists. It's not unusual at all, and I think there's obviously a reason for that.
Here's a question I've wondered after reading some of your work recently. Have you given any thought at all to writing a work of fiction based on some of the places and events involving September 11th, some of the characters, some of the people, some of the conflicts?
It's an interesting question, and it's certainly crossed my mind once or twice. The only downside I see to that is that I think there are a number of people out there doing those sorts of books. And so what I try to do with my novels is talk about something that's never been talked about before, whether that's a novel of the Taj Mahal. Cross Currents, as far as I know, is the first novel of the tsunami. So I try to identify a culture, a place, an event, and bring that to life if it's never been brought to life before. So September 11th would be intriguing. I mean, I think it would be a really challenging, interesting novel to write, but it's probably not something that really works with my MO.
Well, I've sort of avoided asking you the Iowa hometown boy questions, but I can't resist at least one, because you are, after all, an Iowa hometown boy. Can you talk a little bit about some of the Iowa values that have shaped you and how they have informed your perspective as you've gone abroad to other places, and also how you represent Iowa when you meet people in other parts of the world as being the place that you came from?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very proud to be from Iowa. I took a lot of heat from it in college, friends saying, you grew up in a cornfield, John, and this and that, but I always fought back. I was very resolute, and I think this is a great state, and I'm delighted to have been raised here, and I feel like I've got a great education. And I do think that it filters into my writing, because I think that Iowans have some of the same values that these wonderful people I've met abroad have. Hard work and honesty and integrity and just, good-naturedness to one's neighbor. And I can imagine Iowans reacting in the same sort of way that the Thais did with the tsunami, all gathering together and helping each other out. And I could totally envision something like that. The reaction here to an event like that, I think, would be the same. So it does filter into my writing.
And in fact, it has been the case during the great floods, back in 93, 94. Very much that same spirit of resilience. I don't know if you were living here then. Were you living here then? And the sandbagging and the water lines and all of that. So yeah, there is some experience with that. Any chance that you might ever come back to the state to live?
Anything is possible. I've had a number of...
your parents are in the audience.
Yes,
I think they'd like to hear about
they pressure me on a daily basis.
Yes.
I've got a couple
doing their bidding here.
Yep, I've got a couple of good friends who have moved back, and I think it's great what Des Moines has going on. It's fun to come home and see all the changes to the city, and it's really remarkable, I think, that all that's going on here, and I applaud all of you for that. And anything's possible. It's a great place.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and we hope to see you back here.
Thank you, Reka.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, John. It's been delightful.